Okay, this game is Karpov versus Huebner, played in 1972. They were both champions in their own right at the time of this game. This is a very long positional grind, so be prepared, it's over 70 moves. Karpov playing white, he plays e4, and Huebner plays c5. Now we have what is known as the Can variation. So an early a6 here, and then bishop c5. So that black bishop is interestingly developed on a7, instead of the more classical position, say e7. Karpov now aims for what is known as a Maroczy bind, but first he plays bishop e3 to exchange off that dark square bishop and emphasise more potentially the weaknesses of the dark squares, because pawns are on knight squares here. So here we have this Maroczy bind now. So Karpov is binding the d5 square, trying to stop black from liberating the position later. So we see here that white's pieces are very nicely coordinated. This pawn is immune here because of knight d5 discovering the check on the queen. But let's have a quick peek at that. Knight takes c4. It just looks impossible to play. Bishop takes, queen takes. And now actually, maybe instead of knight d5, my analytical assistant is saying just rook takes d6. So maybe nothing clever, just do this. And white's got a big advantage here. So anyway, so white's got a very pleasant position now. And Huebner played solidly though. He played b6. Now we have bishop e2. Bishop b7. Karpov isn't afraid to gain a bit of space now. He plays f4, and after knight g6 just reinforces the f4 square with g3. His first plan is to intensify a bit the pressure on the d6 pawn, but also maybe later increase the space on the queen side. He plays here a3 now, and after rook ac8 plays knight d4. This knight d4 means that the b pawn can now go to b3 to support the c4 pawn. So Karpov is basically strengthening his position on both sides now. So this g pawn's protecting f4 and the b1 protecting the c pawn. So it's quite a symmetrical kind of strengthening on both sides, trying to clamp black from playing d5. Knight e7 now, bishop f3. So this bishop helps in this overprotection of the d5 square. Rook b8. Now a4. Karpov wants to also discourage any counterplay with b5. So the grip is slightly intensifying now on black's position. To try and relieve this pressure, Huebner doesn't mind the exchange of queens, so he plays e5 here, and after knight e2, e takes f4, gf4 and queen e3. Is Karpov content though to draw from this position? No, he's going to try and grind black down. So we have this primary plan of attacking this weakling pawn on d6. So we see a lot of pressure being exerted now positionally. And Karpov now also even brings his king into the game more. So the king comes to g3 to support f4. So again, a re-strengthening of the position on the king side. Now knight d4. So this potentially is quite menacing because of knight f5 if black isn't defending that, further attacking the d6 square. So black's getting slightly more passive here. Rook c5. So Huebner finds a way of seemingly generating some counterplay now. After knight c2 he plays g5. It's slightly controversial because after f takes g, you'll notice black has these two isolated pawns. So structurally he's created some damage in his pawn structure, but he has isolated this pawn, and this pawn is isolated. But it's the way that Karpov mends his pawn structure soon, which shows that black's going to be worse. After rook takes g3, this is also quite significant, because remember black's got an isolated pawn here. With hg, potentially this h-file is going to be useful for white later, as we're going to see. But the mending of pawn structure occurs now, shortly, with a knight d5 now. This is quite a horrible move to meet. Huebner perhaps had very few choices here. His rook is not ideally placed on e5, and this wasn't an ideal looking move to play. He played after knight f5, he played bishop takes d5, and so white now has 3 pawn islands, so these two are helping each other now. But this c4 square is also very useful for a knight reroute to c4, which will be attacking this weakness. So as we're going to see, that's another plan now strategically, and it wins that pawn. So Karpov is temporarily a pawn up, now pawn equal, but then after rook a1, this pawn is a goner, so he's going to be a pawn up again. But he has to accept some counterplay from black, with this rook coming to the 7th rank. He doesn't mind, he's not too frightened by this, nor knight d7 come to e5, because he has knight c6 just in time. Check, king f4, knight e5, and now he doesn't mind healing black's pawns a bit, because this pawn on e5 could be a target later. Now another plan emerges here. This a pawn, he wants to relieve the rook from supporting that pawn by getting the pawn to a6 so the bishop can support it, so the rook can later come to the h-file to attack this h-pawn. So there's all one strategic plan followed by another. But to do this strategic plan, he needs to first also reinforce e4, and he uses his king to do that. So watch Karpov at work now with these plans. First of all, the defence of e4 relieves the bishop of its duty to protect the e4 pawn. Once the bishop can protect the a pawn, then the rook can come to the h-file to finally attack this isolated pawn here. So you see now Karpov's plans coming together like the A-team. Knight f8, and now Karpov gets a rook h6 in, and this rook is quite menacing here on the 6th rank because of d6 check, and now further restriction of black's position with bishop b5. After rook a8, Karpov finds a way of winning further material. He simply probes black to try and defend the e5 square, and black cannot defend all these weaknesses simultaneously with the knight. So he's forced to play f6, but after rook h6, something is dropping off here. Black's position is falling apart. Rook b8, bishop c6. This pawn is also very dangerous. He desperately plays rook b3 check, but after king d2, rook a3, white simply plays rook takes f6. Rook a2 check, and with this check, Huebner also just resigned the game. So it was quite a crushing positional game from Karpov, starting with proxy bind in the opening, but then a series of interlinked plans, all revolving around the. So if we quickly review one strategic plan after the other, first of all, there was stopping black's counterplay, and in particular stopping the liberating d5. But this was also prepared by strengthening c4 and f4 with moves like b3 and g3. Karpov not afraid to play these pawn moves. And also stopping any black counterplay with b5. So the python was at work. And now Karpov in this ending used his king to reinforce the king side by getting the king to g3. So we see one plan after another, and now accepting some structural damage, because Karpov knows he's going to be able to fix his pawn structure a bit later with this knight d5 coming up. And once that pawn structure was fixed, he had the c4 square for his knight and this h file to attack that isolated pawn here. So this is how he won his first pawn, creating that very dangerous a pawn. And then finally we have this responsibility transition. The king comes to defend e4 to let the bishop free of its duty there, and the bishop protecting the a pawn let the rook come to the h file, and then finally black just fell to pieces. As a positional masterpiece, this is why Karpov was so fearsome in the 70s after Fischer defaulted to him. Karpov proved to the world he was the number one.